Hello everyone, welcome to an episode of The Box Cutter, where this month it's Latino Heritage Month. Latino Heritage Month takes place between September 15th and October 15th. This is part 2 of my retrospective of Nickelodeon's The Brothers Garcia. If you haven't checked it out already, go ahead and check out part 1. In part 2, I'll be talking about the characters, my opinions of them, and what I feel is their standout episode throughout the series. So, Part 2, the characters. So, as explained in Part 1 of this retrospective, there are 6 members of the Garcia household. There is Dad, Ray Garcia, played by Carlos La Cámara. Mom, Sonia Garcia, played by Eza Maris. Oldest son, Carlos, played by Jeffrey Licon. Second oldest, George Garcia, played by Bobby Gonzalez. Only daughter, Lorena Garcia, played by Vanessa Patinsky, and the youngest, Larry Garcia, played by Alvin Alvarez. So, I actually like all the characters. This is one of the few shows where I don't really have a problem with anyone, but at the same time, I'm not singing their praises. There are things about them, interestingly, that I love, and at the same time, I get annoyed by sometimes. So, I'm going to start my way from the youngest Garcia member to the oldest Garcia member. So, let's go and start off with the main character, which is Larry, played by Alvin Alvarez. Larry Garcia is the youngest of the Garcia boys and fraternal twin to Lorena. He loves space. His number one dream in life is to be an astronaut and work for NASA and, be up in space. And personally, I'd say, even though he's the main character, I feel like he is the most vanilla. Most of the time when you see shows like this, the youngest member of a family tends to be the most sassy or prankster-ish or out there creative weird. But Larry is very goody two-shoes, very by the book, very innocent. I'd say my standout episode for Larry would have to be where he wants to stand out among his brothers and sister. Being the youngest, I can totally understand that. You live in your siblings' shadows of, oh, you're so-and-so's brother, or isn't so-and-so your sister? Versus you being your own individual. You want to be your own individual. So I can relate in that sense of Larry's character wanting to be known for something. And what he chose to be known for, he wanted to be known for not only being an astronaut in the future, but in his immediate future, he wanted to be known as the only other person in their family that can withstand the spiciness of their family's spicy special salsa that their dad loves. And so he trains and he trains and he trains, and even then, he fails. He tried his hardest, but he failed, and a lot of his issues as a character throughout the show tend to be centered around him wanting to be like his brothers, or wanting to prove himself, or just being his own individual without having to be associated with his brothers. So, my least favorite episode of him, though, would have to be when the mom and dad go out of town for the night, I believe. And so they leave Carlos in charge. And so Larry decides to cut loose finally and throw a party. And throughout the whole episode, he was just being so uncool. Uncool in the sense of he was being rude. He didn't care about what other people had to say or think. He was just looking out for himself, wanting to look cool and be a rebel. And when his brother Carlos was gonna throw everybody out and call his parents and tell them that it was Larry who was throwing a party, Larry outsmarted Carlos by saying, okay, go ahead and call them. But I'll go ahead and tell them that, but I'll go ahead and blackmail you and tell them about what happened the last time, and blah, blah, blah. And that's probably the one episode where I just did not like Larry at all. Like, at all. But other than that, I'd say he's definitely a good main character in that. He's very much a blank slate. We know about him. We know what he likes. But then again, a lot of what he likes tends to be what his brothers like. And the one thing that he is known for is that he is a good kid that wants to grow up to be an astronaut. Alright, moving on to the next character is Lorena, played by Vanessa Patinsky. Lorena Garcia is the only daughter of the Garcia family. She loves novelas, she loves boy bands, she loves to gossip and spread chismes, and she loves to use that to her advantage. Lorena Garcia was one of the earliest crushes I remember having on a TV character growing up. I just thought she was pretty, and she used to be my favorite character because of that. However, rewatching the show, she wasn't that she wasn't my favorite character. It's just that, well, she was okay. I felt that she was definitely smart, and she was clever, and she was manipulative. And most of the time, her episodes would focus around her learning to be more empathetic towards other people, as well as learning to compromise with their brothers, or just learning that her way isn't always the right way. I would say for Lorena, her standout episode would be when their mom and dad are going on a second honeymoon. And so their mom gets sick a few days before, and so Lorena is praying to God. She's saying, if you make my mom feel better, I will promise not to watch novelas for a whole month and do my homework and all this stuff. And so, by some miraculous miracle, her mom gets better. And so throughout the episode, she's tempted to want to watch novelas and to hear about them, and she's really trying to take her mind off of it. But, even though she's trying to distract herself by, watching different channels on TV, it all, correlates back to the novela she watches. And some of the novelas she watches it's so funny to hear the names of them, because you have Amor y Lechuga, which is love and lettuce, about like some farmhand woman falling in love with some other farmhand on their ranch, their lettuce ranch. And then you have Amor y Escargot. I don't know what that one's about. And then I believe the last one she really liked, or the last one that they mentioned by name, is Pasión y Papas. However, she just can't hold out, and she gives in to them, and then her mom again starts to fall ill. So, unbeknownst to her, her brother Larry was overhearing her prayer to God. And so, when she went back on her word, she thought that God was upset with her and punishing her. So they try and figure out, how to deal with it. And so they go to like a reverend, a father, a pastor, and they explain what happened. And I really like what this character said. because Lorena's just worried that she made a mistake and that she thinks her mom's gonna die. So the man just says, we're all gonna die eventually, and you have to understand that there is no bargaining with God, and that if your mom happens to get sick, you shouldn't have to feel guilty because you tried to make a deal with God. It's not your fault if she gets sick. So, all you can do is be there for her and, help to take care of her and love her. But you can't beat yourself up and blame yourself for trying to make a deal with God and not seeing it through. I'd say my least favorite Lorena-centric episode would have to be where it was an episode where her brothers, she got so tired of her brothers treating her as a girl in the respect of, oh, this is boy stuff. Oh, go ahead, brother, you can go ahead and use the computer, when she tried asking for it. And so she's fed up, she tells mom, and mom helps her to enforce equality for all of them. However, when she gets the opportunity to be on the student council, I believe, and she brings them over to make cupcakes for some fundraiser, her brothers use their plan to get back at her. Of like, oh, we're all equals, we can do this, we can do that. Oh, that's not girl things. Baking's not a girl thing. Let's help you with that, sister. And I was like, this is so unfair. Because all she wants is to be treated just like her brothers, as an equal. She doesn't want to be seen as their sister. She doesn't want to be seen as a girl. She wants to be seen as an equal. And later on throughout the series, she goes from being a chismosa and nosy and gossiping to someone who starts to be politically active, to be an activist for all sorts of causes, such as, animal rights and other things. But overall, I feel like Lorena, not my favorite character anymore, but I still like her because she has, the sass and the gumption, and, I just find her as a funny character. So next we have George Garcia, played by Bobby Gonzalez. George Garcia, when he first starts out throughout the series, he's rather insecure. He lives in Carlos's shadow because Carlos is cool and he's popular and he's skinny and good looking and, all that stuff that George wants. And George is awkward and nerdy and he's a little heavier and he's all about the internet and all that stuff. And at the time, the internet was seen more as like a nerdy thing because you have to be a nerd to know how to use the internet and spend all your time indoors. So that's where he started out the series. Most of his episodes at the beginning of the series tended to center around him wanting to be better than his brother, one up his brother. And later on throughout the series, he starts to come into his own. He starts to be confident. He starts to stand by his convictions rather than be scared and persuaded to think another way. Eventually, George, like I said, he starts to come into his own. He is his own person, and at points he surpasses his brother Carlos. When they both had a chance to work for a music store, Carlos got the job, but then he decided that he didn't want to really, he wasn't invested in working there. He just wanted the benefits of it. So one day he let his brother George, he convinced his brother George to take his shift. And the manager just loved George that he fired Carlos. And so from that point, George is this music expert. He knows all about music, hip-hop, R&B, jazz, contemporary fusion, all this stuff. And from there, it becomes a launching point for him to become a writer and an interviewer for a music website, writing reviews and interviewing people. And his character, he got to meet a lot of people. He got to meet Solange, he got to meet Soluna, he got to meet Vitamin C, like all these big names of the time. So my standout episode for George would be, interestingly enough, the final episode of The Brothers Garcia, which was when George, for his school project, went to go visit and spend time with a senior at a retirement home. And at first, the man was like, I already know what you're up to. I want nothing to do with you because all you do is come for a few days and then you leave forever. You never come back. They never come back. So, George is persistent for a while and then he gets discouraged. But his dad gives him the advice of, look, everyone has an interesting story to tell. You just have to figure out what your common interest is. So, George goes back, gives it another try, and he's listening to music, and the man hears sampling from one of his songs, and he knows that sampling because the man was actually the one to play that trumpet that the song was sampling. But he wasn't giving George any hints about it. He was just like, oh, what do you know about music? He's like, I know a lot about music. So he's like, nah, you know nothing about music. And drops just one little hint, a man named La Trompeta. So George does his research on the internet, and he finds out that that man was the legendary La Trompeta. And he had to flee Cuba because of all the, all the dangerous political scene that's been happening in Cuba. George has some newfound admiration for this man, and he goes back and he shows interest in, wanting to hear this man's story and wanting him, to pick up the trumpet and play again. And he does. I really like that George went from being this nerdy guy who everyone laughed at because he was fat or because he was nerdy, to being his own person who could stand up for himself. He didn't need his brother Carlos. He didn't need anybody else next to him. He became his own person through all the struggles he went through. However, that didn't come without the growing pains and the annoyances that came with it. Because on the rewatch again, sometimes he did get on my nerve because he would be a little selfish, but I understood why. I would say the most noteworthy episode of George that I would say is not my favorite would have to be when George gets the opportunity to interview Solange Knowles, little sister to Beyonce Knowles. And so everyone is clamoring to want to meet Solange and being, oh, George, you're so cool. Yeah, you can hang with us, George. George, is so enveloped and engrossed in this newfound popularity that he ditches his, his brothers and his sister and invites these people he doesn't even know to meet Solange. But at the last minute, he has a change of heart and, has his brothers and sisters give them the opportunity to meet Solange. Another one, even though I said one, another one I'd say that really stood out in my mind would have to be when he started to gain notoriety as a music reviewer for the website he was writing for, listening to CDs and giving reviews on them. And, people really liked what he was saying, that it got to his head, and, he felt like he was a lot smarter and better than a lot of people, even dismissing his own family. That he's like, my opinion is the only opinion that matters. So when he wrote the latest article, it got met with so much backlash, and even the boss from that website was like, look, I get that you can have an opinion, but there's a difference between having an opinion and using your influence to pass verdict. And so, if I remember correctly, I think he got fired. But then I think he got his job back. But, George definitely has a lot of episodes where he goes through the growing pains of understanding the social complexities of how people use you to get ahead, or that just because people like what you say doesn't mean that you have all this power. It just means that they like what you say. But I'd say overall, George would have to be my new favorite character in the series. And then we have Carlos. Carlos Garcia, played by Jeffrey Licon, is the oldest Garcia brother. Cool, loves his hair gel, gets all the girls, but he tends to be a slacker. He tends to try and weasel his way out of things and pass his responsibilities off to his brothers and sisters, but at the same time, sometimes it backfires. Throughout the series, he starts out as someone who is just me, all about the ladies, all about them, into being someone who gains wisdom and experience because he's been through that stuff, that now he can help guide his brothers and sister and protect them from the same mistakes that he's made. I'd say my standout episode for Carlos would definitely have to be where he is failing Spanish, ironically enough. So his parents are upset, and so they give him the ultimatum of, okay, so you have until this Friday to have a report ready on an episode of Lorena's novela called Amor y Lechuga, and you have to present it in Spanish. And if you fail, or if you fail to do it, we're just going to send you to go live with your uncle for a few weeks. And you'll have to learn how to speak Spanish the hard way. So, his brothers are trying to help him, getting him, lesson cassette tapes and trying to help him study, but it's just not working. Until he meets this girl named Nicole, who is from Paris, and he wants to be able to go out with her, but, there's a definite language barrier, and so he is determined to, date this girl by learning Spanish because they both happen to be in the same Spanish class, and so it would be a great way to bridge that language gap between English and someone who speaks some English, but they're from France, because they both happen to speak Spanish. I just confused myself. Anyways, and so from that point, at the end of the episode, we're told that Carlos learned how to speak a bunch of other languages: French, Spanish, Chinese, and Italian, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But the other thing that stood out in that episode was when their dad said, "Son, learning a second language is like having another soul." In my last episode, I went into depth about that, and so it's something that resonated with me. So that's definitely an episode that I really enjoyed, and a lot of episodes really showcase, Carlos can apply himself and he can be really smart and clever, but he would rather just enjoy life. One of my least favorite episodes is actually one of my least favorite episodes in general from the show, and it would have to be when Carlos is asked to join a band. So Carlos, besides being the lady man, also loves playing the drums. And so there's this cool guy at school named Butter. What a stupid name, by the way. Butter. he's this punk guy, and he's so cool because the girls love a bad boy. And so Carlos over here is that, oh man, that Butter lost his practice spot for his band, and so Carlos offers to host the band at his house, but the caveat being that he has to be in the band. So Butter was like, sure, okay, yeah. Throughout the episode, Butter is playing Carlos and he's playing Lorena, and Lorena and Carlos are refusing to listen to everybody else, saying, hey, Butter's playing you, and when that talent agent comes and signs them, you're gonna get dropped. And so Lorena and Carlos are just refusing to listen to everybody because they're thinking that, oh, you guys are just jealous because you're not in the band, and blah, 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 blah. And Carlos and Lorena are both very stubborn sometimes, and they tend to be like, no, you're lying, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not true. Until they get hurt. So Larry is able to record Butter's conversation, and he played it back to Carlos and Lorena, and so when the time comes for the audition, the rest of the Garcias come up with the plan of, hey, we're going to ruin this audition by by bringing back Dad's old band, the Orange Fandangos. And so the plan goes accordingly, and they ruin the audition. But again, it's one of my least favorite episodes. Simply because Carlos is refusing to listen when Carlos has been in this situation before. So you would think he'd learn, but he just didn't. But throughout the series, he goes from, again, being this slacker who is all about himself to being somebody that, has been through the experience and said, look, bro, you don't ditch your old friends for new friends because your new friends happen to be popular. Listen, Lorena, you don't go after another guy if he's already dating another girl. So, I like Carlos, but George is definitely my favorite character. And then we got Mom and Dad. Mom, Sonia Garcia, played by Eda Maris, very loving, and she had that very calming and nurturing voice, that maternal voice. And along with that, she is a woman who has her own business. A Hispanic woman who has her own beauty salon. And, everyone loves it, and she gives free haircuts to kids on Sunday, then she goes to church. She seems like such a nice and caring woman. That she has time for her kids, that she has time for her husband, but sometimes her stories tend to be centered around the fact that she just doesn't make time for herself. And she can be very bitter when people take advantage of her just because she happens to enjoy helping other people. My standout episode for her would have to be when their dad's favorite spicy salsa has run out. And so normally their grandma makes the salsa. But their mom is very adamant about, oh, I can make it for you. Oh, no, we don't have to call my mom. She's probably very busy. So she tried their best, making the recipe. And, she's trying and she's trying. It's not spicy enough. It's not this. It's not that. And so when her mom's over, she asks her Mom, I really feel like I'm salsa worthy. How come you don't teach me the recipe? And her mom is just like, Mija, you've always been salsa worthy. It's just that you didn't care enough. And if I give you the recipe, then it'll feel like I'm no longer needed. And that you'll just ignore me. And I won't get to see my grandkids. And at times, I really... It's just, this is my favorite episode. It's my favorite episode because, I love my mom. my mom is like, we're very similar. We're so similar, in fact, that we tend to butt heads, but, I attribute so much of my hard work and my creativity and my dedication and my need to be my own individual and go against the grain to her. She is a hardworking, hustling woman, and I love her to the moon and back. But sometimes I think about it, and I think I should go visit her more often. I should call her more often. And yeah, I don't. Those thoughts linger in my head. So, I totally get where their grandma is coming from. But even then, the Garcias are all about family, so Mom assures Grandma, of course you will. And with you passing this recipe on to me, I'll be able to do the same with Lorena. So Grandma gives her the secret, which is some special chili seeds that you put in the salsa to make it extra spicy. And yeah, so it's definitely one of my favorite episodes. But overall, I'd say she's a great character. She's definitely a TV mom that definitely needs to be talked about more. And last but not least, we have Ray Garcia, played by Carlos La Cámara. He is the head of the household, the dad. He is a professor of Chicano studies at the local university in San Antonio. And he makes it loud and proud to be known that he is a Hispanic who encourages his kids to learn about their culture, to know Spanish, to know about significant figures that have made strides for the Hispanic culture. But even though he has that and he has the wisdom and he's looked up to by his sons and daughter, he isn't without his flaws. He can be very cheap, he can be very stubborn, he can be very much trying to get out of work like Carlos. So I think Carlos gets his thing of trying to get out of work from his dad. And I like the fact that the kids respect their dad, but also aren't afraid of him. When they have problems, they go to mom and dad. When I was growing up, I didn't really feel like going to mom and dad and telling them about my problems. So their dad would give them advice on things like, son, sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. You need to be able to do this. You got to be on your own for this, and blah, blah, blah. So, their dad, even though he had his stubbornness, was definitely someone with wisdom and experience and very loving. So, my standout episode for their dad would have to be when Larry decides to enter their dad into a contest to apply to be on the next space shuttle mission. So their dad's like, there's no way I'm going to get picked. And so he gets an email, and surprise, surprise, he gets chosen to be into consideration for the next space shuttle. So Larry's, hyping him up of like, oh, Dad, we got to get you training. We got to go to the YMCA to run swim laps at the pool. We got to do this. We got to do that. And Carlos and George are selling autographs and pictures of their dad. And so, everyone is rooting for their dad to do this, but no one's asking if he wanted to go. But at the same time, he's going along with it because he likes the fact that Larry sees him as his hero. He, he's doing this for the love of his kids. And, that's commendable. But he just doesn't have the heart to tell Larry that he doesn't want to go. And it isn't until their mom comes up with the plan to have the doctor make a house call. So they get the doctor, And the doctor comes, gives their dad a physical, and so the doctor said that unfortunately, quote unquote, there's a deformation in your dad's ear, which will make it unsuitable for him to go to space. So, what a coincidence. But dad is like, look, I know what's going on. And so he finally mustered up the courage to say, look, Larry, I just don't want to go. And Larry is, visibly sad, but at the same time, he's okay with it. Because he feels that, there are plenty of good people needed here on Earth, just like his dad. So, I feel like all these characters are relatable, they're great, and they break the stereotypical sitcom family. In a lot of sitcom shows, you have the stereotypical formula of, the older brother who's a jock and is smart, and the sister, the middle child sister who's, very girly and likes to go out with boys all the time and, all the hot gossip and is popular. And the little brother who's annoying and plays jokes on everybody or is sassy and whatnot. This show breaks that mold. It goes against the mold of, Lorena has to be prissy and she has to date boys and she has to be boy crazy. No, Lorena is smart and she's clever and she doesn't put up with her brother's nonsense, and they develop her into a girl who knows her worth, who is an activist, who is all, but also is also a blossoming young woman. And then you have Carlos being the oldest. He's not a jock. He plays sports, but he's not a jock. He's all about being cool and popular and his hair and all that stuff. And then you have Larry isn't a prankster. Larry isn't necessarily sassy. Larry's a good kid. Larry is studious. He loves space. He cares about people. He's empathetic. And he's the innocence of the Garcia family. He helps keep everyone grounded. And you have mom and dad. Mom and dad are equals. It isn't that, mom is ditzy and dad is the smart one, or mom is the smart one and dad is the brain-dead clueless one. They are equals. They complement each other. Where dad is smart and very headstrong, mom is clever and empathetic. But along with that, we get moments of them just talking. Them sharing their feelings. Them sharing their frustrations. And I feel like a lot of kids' sitcoms and family shows, they don't tend to do that. They tend to just show either them bickering or them just being googly-eyed and saying I love you, but they don't really show them talking. And this show showed their parents just having conversations sometimes about things from their past and, old boyfriends or girlfriends they used to have and all this stuff. But overall, I'd say this is a great representation of, that a Hispanic family doesn't have to fall into, a stereotypical thing of the jock, the boy crazy sister, the sassy young kid child, brother, sister, whatever, and the bickering parents. This is a family unit. They are a functional, loving family. And even though they have their differences and they argue, at the end of the day, they all sit down and have a meal together. So, in part 3, I have something very special planned, and you'll just have to wait to listen to that episode to find out. Make sure to leave a comment. If you like what you hear, why not subscribe? I'm on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud at theboxcutterpodcast@gmail.com. Send all feedback, comments, and suggestions to theboxcutterpodcast@gmail.com because it takes a village to raise something beautiful. In the words of Larry Garcia, todo para la familia. Everything for the family.
Si pudiera voy